Hello, my name is Leila Zamora. I'm a bassoonist and a member of the San Diego Symphony Orchestra and a very good friend of the Meg Weekly Vivaldi Competition and Bassoon Symposium. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the fifth session of the MQVC Summer Series. The MQVC Vivaldi competition started out as an event that brought 5 young players together to compete in a live round. I was a member of the jury of the very first competition back in 2005. And I remember how exciting it was to hear so many wonderfully talented bassoonists. McQuigley Vivaldi competition has since grown to become a 3-day symposium built around a competition that brings 10 young players together to 2 live rounds. I look forward to each symposium because I'm amazed of the drive, the talent, the tenacity, the determination of not only the competitors, but the other players who play in the master classes. I always learn a great deal and I'm humbled by it. These summer sessions have featured a variety of special topics very relevant to the Make Quigley mission, like inclusivity, audience engagement, and community involvement on the arts. This one today is titled Competition and Audition Preparation, and it features previous finalists of our competition. First of all, I want to thank many thanks to Trevco, Warner Music, the music source, for generously sponsoring this session today. It is now my pleasure to introduce the host for this panel, someone who herself has been a competitor. Our host was a semifinalist in 2014 and won the second prize in 2016. She began to volunteer for the organization, and now she's a crucial member of the all-volunteer team that keeps this organization going. Over to you, Jessica, and thank you so much for your service to this organization. Thank you.
Thanks, Leila. Thanks for being here, and thanks for your wonderful introduction. Before we start, I'd also like to thank the entire Meg Quigley Vivaldi competition team for organizing such an excellent and informative series for our community of bassoonists. And also, I'd like to thank Dave Wells, who you might see in the chat, is a digital genius, and he's been operating things behind the scenes so far. If you have any questions about anything we talk about today, please direct your questions to the Q&A, which is at the bottom of your screen, and Dave will try to answer some questions and forward them to our panelists if it's something that we think we can answer live. As Leila said, my name is Jessica Finley Yang, and I'm currently the principal bassoonist of the Knoxville Symphony and the social media director for Meg Quigley. And I volunteer my time to Meg Quigley because I believe in the mission and because participating in the competition really jump-started my ambition and drive to be a professional bassoonist. And I wanted to help pass that opportunity on to the next generation of fantastic young women bassoonists. And speaking of fantastic young women bassoonists, welcome to the panelists today, all of whom are former competitors, or Quiggles, as we like to call them. With us today, we have 3 first prize winners, so they are extra special. Marissa Esposito, who was our most recent winner in 2019, Ivy Ringel, who won in 2014, and Amanda Swain, who won in 2010. And I'd love to start this conversation by just having each of you tell us a little bit about yourself and your career path on the bassoon. And why don't we start chronologically backwards? So let's start with Marissa. Is that okay? We didn't talk about this before. Okay, let's hear from Marissa.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Hi. So first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here and talk to so many people. So hi, everyone out there who I can't see right now. So I'm a bassoonist. I started playing when I was about 14, and I am now living in Cleveland, and I graduated in 2019 from the Cleveland Institute of Music with my artist diploma, where I had also gotten my master's degree, and I got my bachelor's in music education from SUNY Fredonia. And since graduating, I've had the opportunity to teach adjunct at my alma mater at SUNY Fredonia. So that's been some really wonderful experience. Not only as a teacher, teaching is one of my biggest passions, but also as a musician. Anybody who teaches knows that teaching is so beneficial for, the teacher themselves. We learn so much from our students and from just the journey of trying to help other people on their journeys. I also sub frequently with the Erie Philharmonic and with the City Music Cleveland Chamber Orchestra here in Cleveland, where I am residing. It's a great place, so I've sort of stuck around after graduating. And this is my dog, Cassie. Hi, baby, she wants to be in it. She's also a star. And I'm really excited that my most recent academic appointment is to Baldwin Wallace Conservatory. So I'll be starting in the fall as their bassoon faculty. So yeah, really excited to start with that. And that's, I guess, my path on this journey. Before coronavirus, I was taking auditions on a regular basis and trying to land something wherever it is, I will go. But really hitting the audition game hard, especially after coronavirus. I will be back in it,
Great. Yeah, thanks for that introduction, and congratulations on your recent appointment. That's awesome. Let's hear from Ivy now.
Hi, I am Ivy Ringel, and it is so lovely to be here today talking with all of you. And I am currently the principal bassoon of the Indianapolis Symphony Orchestra. And coronavirus hit halfway through my first season here, so it's certainly been an interesting first year. But prior to that, I actually began music as a violinist when I was 5 years old, and I played violin for probably 8 or 9 years before I started playing the bassoon when I was 12, and I fell in love with it and it stuck. And then on, I went and did my undergraduate degree at the Eastman School of Music in Rochester. And while I was, during my undergraduate, was when I did the Meg Quigley competition. And it was sort of, it was my sophomore year of college, 2014. And it was really, I think, probably the most pivotal experience that made me sure that I wanted to do this as my career, and also gave me the confidence and the ambition in getting to meet such like-minded and talented individuals that really just helped me grow so much. And I'm always going to be grateful to the Meg Quigley competition for starting me out on that path. And after that, I did my master's degree at Rice University. And sort of between Rice and ending up here, I was a freelancer. I played with the Atlanta Opera and the Des Moines Metro Opera Orchestra, and played all sorts of different places in between. And that's my path.
Excellent. Thank you, Ivy. And last but not least, let's hear from Amanda.
All right. Hi, everyone. So when Jessica said that I won in 2010, I had no idea that was 10 years ago. And I'm floored because it doesn't feel like it was that long ago. But yeah, it's been a really fun decade, I guess, of bassooning. So I went to UT Austin for my undergrad and studied with one of the founders of the competition, Kristen Wolf Jensen, the incredible. And then I went to Northwestern for my master's, studied with Chris Millard. And then I had a fun year of freelance and day jobs and trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. And then I got jobs with principal bassoon in Houston Grand Opera and second bassoon at Houston Ballet, which I've had for 8 years now. And they're jobs that I absolutely love because I grew up in Houston and my whole family is here, so I'm super lucky. And then recently, a year ago, I got appointed to the adjunct instructor for bassoon at Sam Houston State University, which has been fun. And I'm going to do that for at least another year. And other than that, I'm really involved in a bunch of union things. I'm on our local executive board, and I'm vice president of the Regional Orchestra Players Association. So that takes up a lot of my time, but it's really important and I love it. And it's a big part of my career.
That's excellent. Thank you for all of your work. I'm actually in a Ropa orchestra myself, and I really appreciate the whole organization for supporting musicians and protecting our rights. So thank you.
I think everyone in here has played in a Ropa orchestra. Marissa, you said Erie Philharmonic, that's Ropa, and Ivy played in Atlanta Opera, which is also Ropa, and Jessica's in Knoxville. So yeah, it's a big family. Yeah,
yep.
That's great.
All right, so next question is for everybody. I think many of our listeners and people who are watching right now might be potential future competitors themselves. And I'm sure that they all have one question, which is, how did you do it? How did you win? So I'd love to know, and we can maybe start backwards. Let's start with Amanda on this. What was your secret to success? What was your routine? How many reads did you make? What strategies did you use? Lay it on us.
Sure. I mean, reads are always going to be something we complain about. It's tough. I remember the day of the competition, I didn't like any of my reads, and I took a brand new one and scraped it down the day of the competition, and somehow it worked. I have no idea how. I remember what it looked like. It was black with red polka dots. I called it my ladybug read.
That's
for some
extremely
reason,
brave.
Yeah, so be prepared. Have more options than I had, but I at least had reads at different stages. And I think that is a valuable lesson to have, to not just have a read that you're comfortable with in your city and your climate, because if you're traveling, no matter where you're traveling, the humidity levels, the temperatures, the altitude, it's going to change. So have reads from different stages of their life in your read box, really old ones, new ones, middle ones, whatever, harder, softer, just to give you a variety of options to choose from. I was thinking about some sort of anecdotes I could tell you guys in terms of preparation, and the one that popped in my head had to do with memorization. So I don't remember what all the requirements are now in terms of memorization, but we had to just play the Vivaldi Concerto by memory.
Yes,
10
that's
years
what
ago.
we do now.
Fantastic. Well, this is applicable then. So I was taking a lesson from Lewis Kirk, who was also teaching at Northwestern at the time. He taught more the undergrads and the grad students, but we would still occasionally have lessons with him. And I was getting ready for the competition and playing from memory. And he commented that I was keeping my eyes closed, like all the time. And he's like, that's not good stage presence. Like, it's fine for a moment for effect, you know, that you're in the moment. But he's like, you have to be able to make a connection with your audience. And he made me play an entire movement of it staring directly into his eyes, which was one of the most awkward experiences I've had in my life, but it broke the habit for me. And it stuck with me that's making that connection with your audience is important. And if you can stare at someone for that long, doing it, you know, sort of fleetingly in your performance becomes much easier. So when you're practicing memorization, practice in front of a mirror, practice with a friend, ask how you're coming across, because stage presence is really important, I think, in these competitions. I wouldn't say it's as important as the musical element, but it's definitely a component. So work on it. I had to, for sure.
That's really great advice. And I think a lot of us, when we practice memorizing, we do close our eyes. So I don't want to have that experience of staring into someone's eyes for a whole movement, but maybe something to think about for all of us.
It was helpful, even if it was terrifying.
Yeah. Ivy, let's hear from you. Do you have any memories of preparing for the competition? Any advice you can give?
I definitely second Amanda's advice about having reads with you at every stage of their development. I was thinking back on my Quiggly experience, and I think I actually had some serendipitous luck in that regard, because I was coming from Rochester, New York in January to Texas, and none of my reads worked in Rochester at all. So I was kind of just like, I'm just going to bring everything. I can't get anything to work beforehand, but I'm just going to bring everything I have. And then I got to Texas the year I was there. It was at Round Top near Houston. But in January there, the weather is much more mild, and all of a sudden it was like I had options. So, I mean, you never know. You really just never know with reads what might pull through. And I think I ended up using a read that I thought about throwing in the trash can the week prior for the competition, and it held its way through both rounds. And I also remember that read because it was pink and wrapped really messily. Like, I feel like sometimes the reads that get through like important concerts or something, they always stick in your mind in that regard. But
that's amazing.
Going to the preparation process, the primary thing I remember is just listening to every single recording of the Vivaldi concerto that we had that year. It was the G minor, I think, RV 495. And I probably found like every single, probably 20 different recordings, and just went through and sort of wrote down, I really like what this person is doing with their ornamentation, or slow movements, fast movements, tempos, just sort of ideas that I found really compelling. And I'm definitely a planner, so I actually kind of went into the competition and like made a spreadsheet and just got really like geeky and organized with like all of my tempos for every piece and stuff. And that's just what worked for me with this process. But I would definitely say, think about what ways you like to learn and process repertoire and process information, whether that's auditory, whether that's making a spreadsheet like me, I'm a nerd, yeah. Whether that's just through doing, whether that's through, hopefully not through having to play an entire movement while making eye contact with Lewis Kirk. I don't envy your story there, Amanda, but play to your strengths and embrace them as part of the process.
Thank you. That's really great advice. And I'll also say that spreadsheets, the older I get, spreadsheets are not nerdy. They're essential. So that's great advice. And I actually think I'm going to take some of that into consideration for future auditions. That seems like a good idea. Okay, Marissa is our most recent winner. So she might have the freshest, hot off the press ideas about how to win a competition. So let's hear from her.
So let's talk about the memory aspect, because I think that's probably the most consuming of our energy and our anxieties. At least for me, it was. I think that when it comes time to perform, the most comforting thing is knowing that you prepared as much as you can in every way. So for me, that is, I was constantly worrying about what if I have a memory slip, you know, which I think I had one. I think you always have to plan for something happening, because it's never going to be perfect. And just having the mentality that something is going to happen, something's going to go wrong. I think it's all in the way that you think about it. It doesn't have to be wrong, but we're humans and we're not robots. And when we're giving a live performance, something's going to happen. You know, you're going to be in the moment, and you have to be prepared. When you're playing a piece from memory, you have to be prepared for if something happens, and you have to plan for it. Because if you don't, then the moment something does happen, you're going to go off the rails and start spiraling mentally. And I really believe that it's essential to practice the skill of thinking on your feet and covering up for whatever might happen, so that you know, like I identified in the Vivaldi that we played in the F major 485, a couple spots that always were a little bit tricky for me memory wise, just whatever it was, the harmony or the fingers. And I made sure that I had a plan, like an escape plan pretty much, for if something happened in one of those spots, that I knew the note that I was going to go to. And I really planned and rehearsed those scenarios. And I think that the way that we're taught in conservatories is often just really product based and like perfection oriented, which is really important, especially if you're going for, auditions. You need to have that foundation. But the mental aspect and just being kind to yourself and accepting what comes out of your instrument and not spiraling about it, not beating yourself up in the moment and not afterwards. I think that is really helpful. So having multiple strategies for memorization in case one fails. So some people are visual people and they try to actually picture in their mind the page. So you can imagine like, oh, I'm getting to the bottom of the first page. Now I'm at the top of the next page. Some people are just muscle memory. Some people like to actually think of the note names. So I tried to do all of them, and I would recommend to just employ as many strategies as you possibly can think of, because, and practice them all. Just, fingering through air bassoon, you could do it really subtly. You could do it pretty much like in your mind, just walking down the street, doing the dishes, going through the note names, just anything and everything, so that when the moment comes to perform, you can actually rest easy. You don't have to be worrying. You don't have to have that nervous anxiety. It could just be excitement. And in terms of stage presence and eye contact, something that I found really helpful, and it's something that opera singers do, and I live with an opera singer, so I get a lot of inspiration actually from him. But they do a lot of miming, including facial expression and body language, without actually vocalizing, in order to practice their stage routine and their stage presence, and practice the effects that they can create without actually having to use the voice. So that's something that I did a lot in the practice rooms at, like right before I went on stage. I would stare myself in the eye in the mirror with my bassoon, and I would like pretend like I was playing, but I wouldn't really be playing, because I think the mental aspect in those critical moments can really make or break you. So if you're practicing and noodling around in the practice room right beforehand, you can really psych yourself out. And if you mess up a lick, or if something happens that you didn't want it to happen, then you're like, oh my God, I'm about to go on. But if you do that sort of mental practice, or even some meditation, or just the miming, then you only set yourself up for success, and you can't possibly make a mistake. And at that point, right before you're about to perform, it's just all about psyching yourself up and just being really excited. So I think that prioritizing kindness to yourself, like go easy on yourself. Don't try to do anything that's gonna invite any doubt in your mind.
That's such great advice. And I think we all struggle with that, to be kind to ourselves, especially around stressful situations like auditions and competitions. And I also loved what you said about memorization. As a two-time competitor, the first time I competed was actually when Ivy won, and I remember being on stage and basically forgetting like half of the second movement of the Vivaldi concerto we were playing, because I hadn't done exactly what you described of doing multiple strategies, and I felt really stressed out about the memorization when I was preparing, and I don't think I had the right strategies. So the second time that I competed, I did much better. And I will say also, I made several memory mistakes in the final round in 2016, but again, I practiced making some mistakes, or like trying to be calm, and it really helped me stay focused and stay in the moment. So didn't get too off the rails. So and speaking of auditions and what Marissa was saying about being kind to yourself, I also practice that when I take orchestral auditions. I try to really not pass too much harsh judgment on myself while I'm practicing, and then also while I'm on stage. And I'm hoping, since all three of you are experienced audition takers. I'd love to hear some more thoughts about how you prepare differently for solo rep versus orchestral rep, because when we play solo music, you know, we're with someone else possibly on stage, a string quartet or a pianist, but orchestral music and taking auditions is very strange, and people probably want to know what your process is. So maybe let's hear from Ivy.
Yeah, so I feel like my own journey with learning, I guess orchestral repertoire in particular, has jumped around a lot recently because I went from playing in an opera orchestra to taking a bunch of symphony orchestra auditions to then learning orchestral music on a week-by-week basis as being part of a symphony orchestra. And each one is kind of its own skill. And I'm sure that Amanda especially probably can attest that learning an opera is a different thing than learning a symphony orchestra work. But I think for me, what's helped me kind of throughout is to spend as much time getting to know the pieces off the bassoon as possible, with score studying and just really getting a sense. And this goes for whether it's an excerpt or a larger work, really getting to know like the bassoon specific role in the woodwind section, marking who you're with, just making sure that as much preparation that can be done kind of off the bassoon with a score first is taken care of before I even start trying to prepare, especially if it's for an audition. Because with auditions, it's really easy to see a very long list and just get very quickly overwhelmed at the sheer quantity of repertoire you have to learn. And I think the biggest thing that's helped me with auditions is to shape the process. And this sort of goes along with what Marissa was just saying about being compassionate with yourself and being kind to yourself, but to shape the audition process into a way where you can get enjoyment and satisfaction out of the process itself rather than just the end goal. And I feel like for me, that has been a lifelong challenge of figuring out how to finagle that, but even just like really little things like, oh, I found this recording of Tchaikovsky 4 that I really love right now. Maybe I'm just going to play with that recording. Like taking a chance whenever you can to fit my audition or orchestral practice within some degree of spontaneity and creativity when possible. I find it's really helped me keep a more positive attitude and helped me stay engaged with the process and be able to be a more active learner and listener through it all. And in terms of like solo repertoire versus orchestral repertoire, I feel like my solo learning has been sort of a recent rediscovery because of coronavirus, right? So most orchestral projects have stopped. And I think with that, I'm really just enjoying the freedom of not having a structure or a set deadline, but which can be both challenging, but also just really liberating. But I definitely wish that in my day-to-day life, I had more time to explore the solo aspects of things.
Yeah, I wonder if, you know, moving forward post-coronavirus, if hopefully that can be something that orchestras incorporate into their programming, that would be more solo recitals, fewer musicians on stage, but for us to get to explore this repertoire again, I mean, we have some really great pieces, and yeah, I hope that's something that comes back. I know that some orchestras already do that, but we'll see. Amanda, let's hear from you. When you won your auditions in Houston, have you taken auditions since that time, or have you decided that that period of your life, that terrible period of your life of taking auditions, is over?
I did take the associate principal bassoon audition in the Houston Symphony 2 years ago and was in the final 2 for that. So I'm still doing some auditions, but I mean, I'm really happy with my jobs. I love opera and ballet. I mean, when I was was a senior in high school and we were having to like write college essays, like what is your dream job sort of question. And I literally wrote that I wanted to play in a repertory company like Houston Grand Opera or Houston Ballet. That was in my college essay. And so to actually have the jobs that I wanted in the city that I love, like the idea of leaving here is not, it does not fill me with joy. So so I may take some auditions. I think they're great. I feel like I'm in some of my best playing shape when I'm getting ready for an audition. I like the process of audition. I like the process of competition. And I think
like taking auditions.
I like the process of preparing for taking the audition, but you do have to find some joy in it. Otherwise, you're just going to be miserable. So I always try to find a moment in the actual audition, assuming I've prepared adequately, to take a moment and find some sense of joy, whether it's just taking in playing in a great hall or knowing that I'm playing for a great panel of musicians behind the screen, or knowing just that I get to do music for a living. Like finding that moment of joy for me is really important in helping me feel centered in a stressful situation, whether that's auditions or public speaking or, playing Elixir of Love with the big, bassoon solo. It's finding a moment of joy is important. I do want to address, I think kindness to yourself is really important, but that's not to be confused with being hard on yourself in your playing. I think sometimes my students, my undergrads, when I ask them to evaluate their playing, whether they just played an excerpt or an etude, and I ask them, well, how do you think that go? One of the first things they say is, oh, I think that went pretty good. And I'm trying to get them out of that. It's good to, of course, evaluate what's good about your playing, but I think I have this tendency also to kind of skirt over the things that like, oh, well, that's a really hard thing to do, so it's okay that it wasn't perfect, right? So I would challenge anyone who's preparing for an audition to be really tough on their listening of themselves. Record yourselves frequently. I think that's one of the main reasons that I got the jobs that I have now, is because I made specifically one recording. I sent one recording to a guitar player friend in Australia who was writing my butt about it. Like, you told me you were going to make this recording. I still haven't gotten it, and the audition's like a week away. And so I did. I finally made that silly recording, and I'm glad I did. It forced me to actually have a full run through of all the excerpts, and that list was massive. It was big opera excerpts, a lot of second bassoon excerpts, symphonic excerpts, most stuff I didn't know because I was just out of grad school. So make recordings of yourself, send them out to people, because it's terrifying, and they'll be honest with you. They won't tell you, all the things that they like. They're going to try to pick it apart and determine, which things you need to work on. And that's what you need. You don't need people to tell you, good job, you're doing a good job. No, because that's not really going to help you win an audition. It's going to be someone telling you, you're 10 cents flat on that note, bring it up. You need better support. I don't like the tempo of this. I don't feel like it's moving. I don't feel like you're singing, whatever comments they are, take them not as, and those critical comments are not a comment on you as a human being. And that's maybe where the kindness element comes in. Your worth is not determined by how well you perform. That's not it at all. So don't confuse the two. Be kind to yourself as a human being, but be a hard ass when it comes to your bassoon playing and evaluating it objectively.
That's such great advice. Thank you, Amanda. I often feel when I take lessons that it's scary to play stuff that you maybe are not confident in, but you have to take the risk of like falling on your face so that person can help you. So you shouldn't be sad when your teacher tells you that you're doing something wrong. Yeah, it's an opportunity for you to grow and learn. So great advice. Marissa, you said that you've been taking some orchestral auditions recently and getting really serious about that. What strategies have you been using recently in that kind of preparation?
So in preparation, maybe about 2 years ago is when I started to get really serious about applying myself to these auditions, because for a long time I felt, and I still feel, sort of insecure about auditions, because I feel like I'm really in the thick of it, in the thick of the uphill battle right now, especially with things at a standstill. But I picked up the book by Sharon Sparrow, assistant principal flute of the Detroit Symphony Orchestra, that she wrote, called 6 Weeks to Finals. And it's really a fantastic book about just her procedure. And there's, of course, a lot of personal touches that everybody has to put on their own routine. But she has this index card method that I really love. And my most successful auditions have been a result, I think, of this sort of thorough practice. And it's more, we say quality practice is more important than quantity. So with this method, I appreciate that you only practice each excerpt once a week. But you focus intensely on it. And so you don't feel pressure to get through like the sheer volume of the entire list on a daily basis. And there's this, structure, it's structured in such a way that you can really dive deep emotionally into the music as well, because you might only have 5 or 6 or maybe less, depending on the list, excerpts to really work on per day. And the method is really that you record yourself playing it, and then you listen back several times with different criteria. And I sort of enjoy the clinical approach to refining an audition. I think it could be really procedural and meditative almost. So you want to be emotionally invested in the music, but you can also sort of suspend your emotional state and just get down to business and not make harsh judgments, but not in any sort of derogatory way or any sort of ego boosting kind of way. Just that didn't sound good, and that's okay. I'm going to try again. And I often find myself going into like a rabbit hole of recording and listening back and recording and listening back just over and over again to try to make sure that my idea is coming through. And in auditions, you don't want to, especially in the preliminary round, if you're just trying to, my goal for the past couple auditions has really just been to get through the preliminary round. And you don't want to make any big moves in the preliminary round. You just want to sort of play it straight and be you, but it's not the time to give a lot of opinions about how you want to play something. It should be sort of, down the middle and matter of fact. And that's, important feedback that you get from other people when you play for them, which you definitely should before you go out for an audition. But for me, also the mental aspect of the screen has been, until recently, really difficult for me, because I am much more of a extrovert, and I like to look you in the eye and I don't know, charm you, convince you with my body language, or just like my ability to make eye contact is really essential for me in the communication process. And I feel that music, even in an audition, you are communicating something. Even if it's just the preliminary round, you're playing Figaro, it's like me, pick me. So just mentally trying to figure out how I could take the energy that I have on my side of the screen and figure out how I could get it through the screen and not let the screen be like a brick wall that I'm like banging my head against. because it could be pretty demoralizing. You know, you walk out there and it's, you know, some terrible space potentially, or it could be an amazing space, but you never know exactly what it's going to be like until you're there. And then there's a screen and there's people on the other side, and it's just sort of a little bit dehumanizing to me. Some people really like the screen, but it's a challenge for me. So I've been working on trying to like reach around the screen or like go under it or over it rather than trying to go through it. And that's worked for me the past couple of times. So for me, it's a lot of mental practice and just experience and just doing it and dealing with any disappointments that come, and just, you know, going to the bar and having a drink and then doing it again.
Yeah. Taking auditions, I think I haven't counted recently, but I think I've taken about 20 different orchestral auditions of varying levels so far in my career over the past 4 years. And it's a slog. It's a real like physical feat that we do. And all of these strategies you guys have mentioned are so valuable, and thank you so much for sharing them with us. I know that I've done several of these. I personally don't really like listening to myself in recordings, and I know that's something that I know I can personally improve upon in my future audition preparation whenever the next one will be scheduled. So I have one final question to ask everyone, and that is, all of us had different starting points on the bassoon, and we've had a unique journey to where we are now, and I'm wondering if you could share, you're all successful women, we are all successful women here in Bassoonists, and I remember being a freshman in college and thinking, how will I ever get there? You know, like, how can I be as good as that person that I see who's 10 years ahead of me? And I'm wondering if you could share any, this is not to say that this is your defining moment of your career, but any obstacles that you've faced or anything that you've had to overcome in your career that has made you stronger, or advice that you could give yourself if you could go back and talk to yourself when you're a freshman in college and say, hey, it's going to be okay. Here's what you need to do. So maybe Marissa, do you want to start? It seems like you have something to say about that. You're muted.
Sure. So for me, there's never been like for everyone, it's an evolution. And for me, I feel like I'm just a musician who happens to be a bassoonist. And I think the most important thing is to remember that, I don't think I would need to go back and give myself advice, because at that time in my life, I had a really influential mentor, Laura Kepke. She was and still like sort of is my mentor. But as a freshman in college, I didn't really know that I wanted to necessarily pursue a career in bassoon performance. Nobody from my high school who played an instrument ever maintained playing their instrument. It just wasn't really a practical thing where I came from to be a musician. So but I knew I didn't want to stop playing the bassoon. And that's why I went to Fredonia, because I like teaching. And so I was a music ed major because that was a practical enough excuse at the time to keep being a musician. And there's a job at the end of it. And also because of Laura Kepke and her, just her. And she made me feel like I already had everything that it took. And I think that's the most important thing for young women, especially. We always feel like we need to prove ourselves, like we don't have something. We feel like we need to work twice as hard to get half as far. And I think just the sentiment that you already have it, you already have everything that you need. There's nothing else that you need. It's just that sort of empowerment that you can, as a young woman, look up to other role models that you might be really impressed by and think, how do I get there? What do I need to do? What do I need to get? You know, but the truth is that you already have all the power. And I think that's the most important thing for any young woman who's aspiring to do anything difficult, and anyone for that matter. But I think it's especially poignant for young women to just have somebody in their lives at that critical moment when they're becoming adults and they have all these ideas of what it is to be an adult and what it is to be successful and what it is to be happy, but you might not really know, or you might just have a lot of preconceived notions about that, like I did, and I probably still do. But yeah, luckily I don't need to go back in time and give myself that advice because I had somebody to give it to me. But I endeavor to give anybody that advice who needs it, and anybody out there, you already have everything that you need. So that's sorry, maybe that was not exactly the answer.
That was so excellent. That was so beautiful. I think everybody, especially right now and this time when we're all kind of questioning the future of our careers, I think that's such a powerful message and it's so beautiful, and thank you for sharing that. That was amazing. Ivy, how about you? Do you have something that you want to tell your younger self, like practice harder or make more reads or
Oh gosh, well, certainly nothing like that. And I really think that what Marissa said was absolutely perfect and kind of, it lines up with a lot of the thoughts I was having looking back. So I don't really feel like I have one particular bit of advice, but probably the biggest thing that stuck with me hearing everything today and thinking about this is remembering that criticizing or analyzing, really is probably a better word, analyzing your work is very different than analyzing yourself. And like, you can analyze your work, your bassoon playing, and have it be very objective and clear, and going into that level of detail is really great. But it doesn't mean that applying the same level of kind of nitpicking scrutiny to yourself is a kind or helpful thing to do. And I think it's really easy for us as musicians and as listeners, and particularly if we're in a mindset where we're auditioning or where we're really trying to make a lot of progress, to begin applying the same critical mindset that we might use in the practice room to our own selves. And I think especially as young women with the pressure to work really, really hard and fit within a pretty, what often feels like a pretty narrow set of expectations in order to be successful, I guess the one thing I would say to myself is that you can be very critical and objective with your work, but with yourself, it's better just to let that go and to, you know, have a bit of an on-off switch there.
That's great. Thank you so much. Amanda, let's hear from you.
Yeah, a couple of things. I forget who said this earlier, but quality over quantity, always, in terms of your practice. I've never practiced more than 2 hours a day in my life. Like, okay, maybe a couple days, like when I had a lot of things, but you know, like for the most part, 2 hours a day is what works really well for me personally. It's enough time to do fundamentals and etudes and excerpt and solo work and then be done. And do other things in life that will inform your playing, score study, going for a walk, listening to music, spending time with friends. All of these things make you a better musician. It is not always about what you do in the practice room. That's just a piece of it. So find the amount of time where you can get the most done, where your mind is the most active, and then don't push it beyond that unless you literally have, you know, hours and hours of music to learn. You know, budget your time appropriately. So quality over quantity. Failure is a great teacher. So whenever you do have something that has not gone as well as you had hoped, It's okay that it hasn't gone as well. Take the time to go back and look at why it didn't. And it is so hard to go back and look at your failures because of course you don't want to go look at them. They're dark places. There were probably tears involved, maybe alcohol if you're of drinking age. It's a hard thing to go back and look at, but it's so valuable. Go through what happened. You will remember most of it. I guarantee you'll remember, I still remember the places I messed up at the Meg Quigley competition in the second movement of the Vivaldi. We've all mentioned it, that we all had mistakes, and it's been 10 years. But go back, look at what went wrong, and figure out how you can make it better. Figure out what preparation steps you can take to improve your performance. So those are two of the biggest things I could probably offer. And I did want to address, there's a quick Q&A question about online lessons and maintaining a trajectory of improvement. And I think it kind of fits in line with this line of questioning we're all talking about right now. Again, quality over quantity. Make a schedule. That's probably the biggest advice I would have for anyone of us in quarantine is make a schedule. That's the only way I can even do anything remotely productive these days is to have set times for things. I think that's a really great way to keep up your trajectory of improvement. Have a plan for your lessons. Make sure you and your teacher are on the same page about what you want to get accomplished, and make it fun. Make it fun. Play along with recordings. I always find that to be really enjoyable. Put on a drum beat metronome when you're practicing etudes or scales. It's a lot more fun than just playing with a click on your Korg or on your iPhone. Put a drum beat on. If you continue to make your, yeah.
I love playing the Mozart Bassoon Concerto Exposition with a rock drum beat that's on my metronome on my phone. It is the most fun I have practicing that piece.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think make it fun is another good general practice technique. Yeah, and keep making recordings of yourself and know that you will improve if you practice. So practice.
Does anyone else have anything to add to that question of how we can optimize online lessons? You both do some online teaching, I assume. So do you have any thoughts or ideas about that?
I do. Yeah, I don't think it's that bad, honestly. I guess this is a hot take, and I think I'm probably in the minority. I haven't met anyone else who shares this opinion, but I really don't think it's that bad teaching online. Obviously, there's no substitute for really being there and really being in person and really hearing every nuance to the sound, to the tone quality and dynamic range. But, especially for students who are more in the beginning stages, those components are not necessarily the things that you're working on in every single lesson. So you can get a lot done with just holding students accountable, by play through this etude, play through this section. I think it's really helpful if there are ground rules, like if you have like a sign that means stop playing because the student can't hear you when you want to jump in. Students can make a lot of progress with the online lessons, and with submitting recordings, I think that, holds them accountable, holds them on a schedule. And I think that I'm a talker, maybe you've gathered that, but I think that some of the most important lesson experiences that you can have is with discussing things and exchanging ideas and trying to get into your student's head and have them explain to you what's going through their minds when they're playing a certain thing, or what they're hearing, or, having them evaluate themselves. Rather than you just evaluating them for them all the time. So have them play a section of an etude, decide we're going to stop at measure 57, make sure you stop there so that you don't have to be screaming into the microphone, and then ask them what they thought about a certain thing that you're talking about. I think that could be really helpful. And I think fostering a dialogue in lessons is always important. And it's something that we could really use to our benefit when we have to teach online, because we know that the sound quality of the instrument is just not there. But, you know, you can hear if somebody's playing with a metronome, you can hear intonation, sort of. If you can get them to send you recordings with a decent microphone, that's even better. But I think it's a good opportunity to talk more verbosely about certain things with your students.
Definitely. I'm also a talker in lessons. I have to apologize to my students often, like, sorry, I talk so much this lesson. But I think in this kind of online era, I think you're exactly right. There's a lot they can learn from our wisdom. So we have another question in the chat, in the Q&A, about fundamental routines and how people are staying consistent from day to day in audition and competition modes. And I feel like this might be a good question for Ivy. I feel like, Ivy, we've talked a little bit. You're really good at having a routine. Is that correct?
I have been trying to have a routine through auditions, competitions, and through this unusual COVID standstill. But I feel like I don't tend to change my routine for auditions or for competitions. And I do this on purpose because I think of my fundamentals routine as something that sort of sets the stage for me to feel comfortable for the rest of my playing that day. And I feel like the auditions and competitions where I've played the best and felt the most comfortable have been when I've felt as much like it was a normal day as possible. So I'd say, at least for me, what works best is to do something simple. Like for me, it's a Hertzberg scale, but the first thing I play every day is a Hertzberg scale. And of course the key changes. I usually sort of just go around the circle if it's every day, or if I'm playing something where I'm having trouble with intonation in a particular key, maybe I'll do that key for a few days or something. But it's always that scale. And whatever that thing is for you, whether it's an etude that you really like, or an intervals exercise, or just something that you can find familiarity and comfort in playing, I feel like having something that's the same in your fundamentals routine every day is really, really valuable. And I certainly wouldn't change it for an audition or a competition.
That's great. Yeah, Amanda.
So I get bored kind of easily with doing the same fundamentals every day. So I tend to change it up day to day, different scale patterns, different long tone patterns, different rhythms, whatever. One thing I do every day is a little improvisation. I'm terrible at it. It's just lyrical. It's not like jazz or technical. I just pick a key and noodle around in it, and it helps me kind of get a singing tone. That's the first thing I do any day when I start on the bassoon, because I'm definitely never in good enough shape to like, I'm going to do a Hertzberg scale at 120 first thing. No, something easy, something simple for me, something where I can find my voice before I start to play. Sometimes, I'll just pick melodies that I'm familiar with and start with that, and then noodle around in different ranges of the instrument. Sometimes I pick a minor key. Warming up in a minor key is okay too. We don't have to warm up in F. It's okay. Venture out, F minor. F minor is very fun. So keep it fun. That's my advice for your fundamentals. Consistency is great. Absolutely have something that you do every day, but keep it exciting. Otherwise, you're going to stop doing it eventually.
Yeah, I love that idea of improvisation. I usually like to start my practice days by listening to cello drones on Spotify, and it has the root and then the fifth on top, so it's a really great place to just improvise. So I like to play scales and melodies and transpose melodies that I love into different keys, like F minor, possibly. So, Marissa, we're almost out of time, but if you have anything you'd like to say about routines, or let me know. What are your thoughts about this?
I'm kind of in both camps. Like I always have some etude practice, but I tend to, I don't progress very quickly through the etude books. I like to sort of sit on an etude for like months, and it'll just be like my etude, like my happy, comfortable, powerful place. And over time, playing the same etude over and over again that consistency is, it's a way to really easily tap into all the fundamentals that you build when you play something with so much comfort and hopefully virtuosity. But like today, I pulled out the Mignone concertino and I was just like, let me just play this. And that was the first thing that I did. And I didn't even like play anything else. And it was like a buzzy read. And I had no routine. I just was excited to pull it out again. And I just sort of jumped right into it. So yeah, that's that. I do both.
Yeah, I think this, especially since we're all kind of at home and having a routine can be really comforting to some people, and then doing something different every day, kind of spontaneity or just playing through pieces that you love is been really comforting to me, and that's been some advice I've given to my students during this online lesson time is if you don't feel like practicing, don't call it practicing, call it playing the bassoon. We play, we don't practice. So trying to find something that you love and just enjoy music making. So if there are no other questions, it is past 6 o'clock, so I think let me just say a few words to close us out. Thank you again for all of you wonderful, talented, amazing ladies for being on this panel today, and thanks to everyone for listening. We've got lots of people on the call today, and I really appreciate your time. There are lots of online activities going on right now, and I appreciate you choosing us. And I'd also like to thank Trevco Varner again for sponsoring this week's video and our panelist appearance. Trevco has actually many of the pieces for this year's competition on their website if you'd like to check them out. They are at trevcomusic.com. And I'd also like to give a plug for next week, which is Quiggle Talk Part 2. And I'll be talking with a few more former Quiggles about the different bassoon career paths they have taken. And so if you have any questions about careers in the bassoon, careers in music, or looking for some inspiration, I hope you'll join us next Thursday. It's the same time, next Thursday at 5. So in our upcoming summer series episodes after that, we'll include some interviews and discussions with many of the fantastic composers of this year's repertoire. So be on the lookout for some more information about that. We've got some really amazing composers of the pieces lined up, and you can follow our social media pages to stay updated on the future events and the details that are about those. And we are on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. So thanks one more time to Ivy, Marissa, and Amanda. You guys are amazing, and I'm feeling really inspired. And I think after dinner, I'm going to do a little playing the bassoon myself. So thanks, everybody, and have a wonderful evening. Bye.